When Pope Francis was elected on March 13, 2013, he greeted the cheering masses in St. Peter's Square with a simple greeting. Fratelli e sorelle, buonasera. Brothers and sisters, good evening. He also made an off-the-cuff joke. You know that it was the duty of the conclave to give Rome a bishop. It seems that my brother cardinals have gone to the ends of the earth to get one. Few expected his election, as Francis had not been a frontrunner before the conclave, the meeting of the eligible cardinals of the Church to elect a new pope after the resignation of Benedict XVI in February 2013. Many asked the same question: just who was this new pope from the ends of the earth? Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, was born into a family of Italian migrants that had settled in Buenos Aires. His grandparents and his father had travelled to Argentina in the hopes of finding a prosperous new life after other family members had established themselves there. They also sought to escape the fascist rule of Benito Mussolini in Italy. In making their escape, they had almost boarded the SS Principessa Mafalda, the Italian Titanic, which sank in 1927, killing 314 of the 1,252 passengers on board. Many of those lost were emigrants, stowaways, and farm labourers travelling to South America for the winter season. His family had not boarded the ship, however, a fact the Pope later himself claimed was an act of divine providence. His father had been introduced to his mother by a priest, Enrique Pozzoli, and the priest later baptised the infant Francis when he was born in 1936. The Pope described his upbringing amongst an ordinary, dignified family as one of simplicity, a simple house in a simple neighbourhood. In his earliest years, he had wanted to be a butcher, having grown up watching one with fascination in the local street markets. As a child, he enjoyed stamp collecting, reading, basketball and football, and lived a relatively normal life. At the age of 17, he began to experience a call to the priesthood, although he was conflicted in his feelings for a local girl, although the two never became officially engaged. His moment of clarity about his vocation came on the 21st of September 1953 at the Church of San Jose, when he felt a call to enter the church and confess. Unable to describe the experience, he later recounted, "The fact is that I was no longer the same, and I left with the knowledge that I would become a priest." The priest that had heard his confession was from a province 500 miles away from Buenos Aires, on the border with Brazil. In later conversations, the priest revealed that he had leukemia and was being treated at the military hospital, where he was also chaplain. This had a profound impact on the young Francis, and the priest's death a year later crushed the future pope. He later revealed, "It was the first time that I felt despair. I felt totally lost, alone, abandoned." While his mother wished for him to become a doctor, the discovery of his theology textbooks led to an awkward conversation as he attempted to prove his earnest desires for the priesthood. In 1956, he entered a seminary run by the Jesuits, a religious order founded by St. Ignatius of Loyola in the 16th century, to test his vocation. While there, in August 1957, he contracted influenza during a global pandemic and suffered from life-threatening pneumonia, the result of which saw part of one of his lungs removed. He later insisted his survival was because of a religious sister that worked at the Dominican hospital he was taken to. Having recovered, Francis entered the novitiate and began his journey towards becoming a Jesuit. After a period of study in Chile, he returned to Argentina in 1961 to begin his studies for the priesthood, during which time he also taught at a local high school. In 1969, he was ordained a priest, and in 1973, took his final perpetual vows as a Jesuit. On the 31st of July 1973, the 36-year-old became provincial superior of the Jesuits in Argentina, a powerful leadership position he would hold until 1979. The responsibility of the role was enormous, and the young priest felt ill-prepared for the task. He later reflected, "I have often said that that appointment was madness," and it was. Francis was superior at a moment of crisis in Argentina, when a brutal military dictatorship took control in a period known as the Dirty War. During that time, military and security forces hunted down anyone that was seen as holding left-wing views or viewed as a potential political threat. Many were tortured and killed as a result, including priests and women religious. While the future Pope took great risks in helping smuggle people out that were in danger, he was also criticised as being unwilling to speak out publicly against the horrors of the regime. He largely followed the example of the bishops in Argentina at the time, who also mostly remained silent. He later admitted, "I made many mistakes, and I would learn many harsh lessons from my errors." After finishing his term of office, he travelled to Ireland in 1980 to learn English, staying in a Jesuit establishment in Dublin for 3 months. He then spent 6 years leading the Jesuit Institute, where he had studied as a cleric. In 1986, he began studying for a doctorate in Buenos Aires, but fell foul of the Jesuit authorities, who viewed him as troublesome in his criticism of some other Jesuits. Eventually, he was ordered to leave Buenos Aires and was effectively exiled to Argentina's second largest city, Cordoba. Remaining problematic to the Jesuit leadership, in 1992 he returned to Buenos Aires as an auxiliary bishop. In 1998, he became Archbishop of the capital city. His period in exile and subsequent responsibilities had transformed his approach. His compassion for the poor and needy took on a more central position as he ministered to the slums and in the streets of the city. He could regularly be seen travelling on the metro amongst the very people he ministered to, an approach that would be reflected later in his papacy. In 2001, he was created cardinal by Pope John Paul II and continued to enjoy an influential position within the church in Argentina. He also had a growing reputation in Rome as a figure open to dialogue and committed to social justice. When he turned 75 in December 2011, he submitted his resignation as required by the laws of the church. As there was no one to replace him, however, he remained in office until a replacement could be found. The first step on the journey to the papacy for Cardinal Bergoglio came in 2005 with the death of Pope John Paul II. Attending the funeral of the late Pope and the conclave to elect his successor, at moments he became the leading opposition to the German Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who eventually became Pope Benedict XVI. The fact that a Latin American cardinal had even been seen as a contender was a sign that the profile and character of the Catholic Church was changing, expanding beyond a focus on Europe for leadership. Some newspapers reported that Cardinal Bergoglio had made an emotional plea for the others not to vote for him, and instead he put his support behind Ratzinger. Having expected to retire aged 75 in 2011, the Cardinal was as shocked as the rest of the Catholic Church when Benedict XVI announced his intentions to retire from the papacy, the first pope to do so in over 600 years, in February 2013. With no replacement for his position being found, the Cardinal once again travelled to Rome to participate in the conclave to nominate Benedict's successor. Both the Cardinal and the wider world were unsuspecting of what was to come. He had largely been ruled out of the running as the next Bishop of Rome due to his age. Yet a speech given by the Cardinal shortly before the conclave to his fellow Cardinals had inspired some of them to reconsider such assumptions. The future Pope himself was convinced that he would not be elected, and after the second ballot was inconclusive, he described that, "I thought that all would go smoothly, so that I could catch my flight to Buenos Aires and celebrate Palm Sunday and Easter there." During the following votes, he prayed the Rosary in peace, but was aware that his votes were slowly increasing. As more and more cardinals began to press him on key issues, he began to realise the situation unfolding. "It was then that I began to understand. I understood at least that the danger was there." On the fifth ballot, he secured the number of votes needed for the papacy, and his friend Cardinal Humes embraced him with a memorable line, "Don't forget the poor." The new pope described how, "Those words of his remained with me. I felt them in my flesh." It was then that the name Francis appeared. During the days of the conclave, a homeless man was wandering around St. Peter's Square with a placard around his neck. On it was written, Pope Francis I, but that image came back to mind only many days later, when the photograph appeared in several newspapers. From the moment of his appearance on the balcony of St. Peter's, it was evident that Francis would be a different style of pope. When robing for his first appearance, he rejected a large golden cross and instead kept his silver one that he had used for many years. He also refused the traditional red garments and shoes of previous popes in favour of his own simple white cassock. Before he emerged onto the balcony, he admitted, "I had no idea what I would say, but I was at peace, calm, a feeling that has never left me." His earliest days as Pope continued this unconventional approach to the traditional trappings of the papacy. After his reception on the balcony, he refused to be driven in a limo, instead catching the minibus with the other cardinals back to their accommodation. During his travels across Rome, he travelled in a blue Ford Focus, noting that, "I saw no more of the limousine." Calling home to Buenos Aires, he informed the Argentinian bishops not to travel to Rome and instead donate the money they would have spent on travel to the local poor. He also rejected the tradition of staying in the papal apartment, which had been sealed up since Benedict had left it. Instead, he took up permanent residence at the Santa Marta guest house, where he had stayed during the elections. He described his opinion of the rooms. There was a reception area, not very large, a small bedroom separated by a sliding door, and a small study, all very simple, and I immediately thought, this is for me. His early activities as Pope continued to catch the headlines. His first official papal visit outside of Rome was to the island of Lampedusa in southern Italy, where many migrants and refugees fleeing warfare attempted to land as a route into Europe. Denouncing people trafficking and referring to the 2013 migrant shipwreck that killed over 300 people, Pope Francis described the island as an underwater cemetery for too many corpses. The cardinals may have gone to the ends of the earth to find Pope Francis, but it was clear that he brought back with him a new perspective and attitude towards many aspects of the Church. Across the span of his papacy, Pope Francis produced many important letters and documents, some of the most significant of which are known as encyclicals. His first encyclical, Lumen Fidei, The Light of Faith, was the first in the history of the Church to be written by two popes. It was started by Benedict XVI and finished by Pope Francis, who worked from a draft completed before Benedict had retired. The encyclical explored the role of faith in the life of each Catholic, and also hinted at some of the themes Francis would continue to explore during the rest of his papacy, including the role of faith in justice, peace, and brotherhood, reflecting his abhorrence towards warfare. In it, he stated, "We need to return to the true basis of brotherhood. Faith teaches us to see that every man and woman represents a blessing for me, that the light of God's face shines on me through the faces of my brothers and sisters." In his earliest years as Pope, Francis oversaw 3 important synods on the topics of the family, 2014, youth, 2018, and on the Church in the Amazon region, 2019. In these years, he began to highlight a concern for the environment and other ecological themes that became central to his second encyclical, Laudato Si, Praise Be to You, in 2015. Laudato Si and the follow-up document Laudate Deum in 2023 were critical of consumerism, environmental damage, and global warming, urging everyone to take care of what the Pope referred to as our common home. The encyclical argued that environmental issues and the inequalities of poverty were interlinked issues, that poorer nations suffered from the exploitation of their resources, while also experiencing the worst effects of climate change as a result. Using language borrowed from St. Francis of Assisi throughout, the Pope argued that all the people of the world needed to take swift and unified global action, explaining, "The urgent challenge to protect our common home includes a concern to bring the whole human family together to seek a sustainable and integral development, for we know that things can change. The writing inspired the creation of the Laudato Si movement, a global network of over 900 Catholic organisations that seek to foster a desire for ecological justice amongst Catholics. Laudato Si was praised widely by organisations including the United Nations, the World Bank Group, and the Africa Progress Panel. Francis returned to the theme of brotherhood in his third encyclical in 2020, Fratelli Tutti, All Brothers, again inspired by the writings of Francis of Assisi. In it, he called for more solidarity between different countries and pleaded for warfare to stop. It tackled issues such as racism, immigration, religious conflict, capital punishment, and the economy throughout its pages. The encyclical came during the height of the COVID pandemic, and Pope Francis looked to the global response to the virus as proof that international collaboration and peace could be easily achieved if they were universally desired. He argued at one point in the encyclical, "A worldwide tragedy like the COVID-19 pandemic momentarily revived the sense that we are a global community, all in the same boat, where one person's problems are the problems of all. Once more we realised that no one is saved alone, we can only be saved together." One of the most striking moments of his papacy came on the 27th of March 2020, when Francis imparted an extraordinary blessing to pray for the end of the pandemic. Stood alone in St. Peter's Square, the striking image of the Pope celebrating the benediction of the Blessed Sacrament, alone in the rain, made headlines around the world. His final papal encyclical, published in 2024, was called Delexit Nos, He Loved Us, and was less focused on social or political issues, rather addressing a fostering of devotion towards the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Even so, it continued on the theme of brotherhood and fraternity that Francis had centred throughout his papacy, and also sought to combat materialistic and selfish modes of thinking the Pope still found in the modern world. He observed, "In contemporary society, people risk losing their centre, the centre of their very selves. No room is left for the heart." No papacy is without controversy, and no pope is without their critics. In the 12 years that Pope Francis was Bishop of Rome, several issues became pressing and made headlines. One of the earliest and ongoing controversies was that concerning the Church's attitude towards homosexuality, the recognition of trans rights, and blessings for gay couples. During an early trip to Latin America for World Youth Day in Rio de Janeiro in 2013, the Pope established his approach towards the issue of homosexuality. During an in-flight press conference, he was asked a question about gay priests, and his reply was, "If someone is gay, who searches for the Lord and has good will, who am I to judge?" He also repeatedly called for an end to the persecution and criminalisation of homosexuality. Further headlines were made in 2023 when Pope Francis approved a ruling allowing priests to bless unmarried and same-sex couples, although the doctrine of the Church towards marriage remained unchanged, and the blessing was not to be seen as an approval of the union. Despite these limitations, it was seen as a significant step in the Church's engagement with the issue. In his own words, he described how more than 60 countries in the world treat homosexuals and transsexuals as criminals, but homosexuality is not a crime. It is a human fact, and the Church and Christians cannot remain indifferent in the face of this criminal injustice, nor can they respond faint-heartedly. Despite such statements, the Church has often been mixed in its messaging. In 2024, the Church issued a document which claimed that any sex change intervention, as a rule, risks threatening the unique dignity the person has received from the moment of conception. Later in 2024, it was reported that Francis had used a derogatory term for gay men during a closed meeting with some Italian bishops. The Vatican later clarified that the Pope never intended to offend or express himself in homophobic terms. Another area of conflict was the Latin Mass. Since the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, the Catholic Mass was increasingly celebrated in vernacular local languages around the world, rather than just in Latin as had been commonplace in the centuries beforehand. The issue has proven controversial for Catholics ever since, and is often a dividing line between those who approve and disapprove of the reforms of the Second Vatican Council. At his first Mass in the Sistine Chapel as Pope, Francis rejected a long pre-prepared sermon in Latin and instead made remarks in Italian, signifying his approach to the issue. He also celebrated Mass facing the people, having the altar turned around from where Benedict had had it moved for a more traditional approach in which the priest had his back turned to the congregation, as was common before the Second Vatican Council. In 2021, he imposed new restrictions on the use of the older Latin Mass, reversing the allowances that Benedict had made. Writing in his own autobiography, the Pope attacked those who sought to return to the Latin Mass. This rigidity is often accompanied by elegant and costly tailoring, lace, fancy trimmings. These ways of dressing up sometimes conceal mental imbalance, emotional deviation, behavioural difficulties, a personal problem that may be exploited. Another topic Pope Francis often focused on was the role of women in the Church. His autobiography revealed that he sought to implement new methods and criteria for ensuring that women are more fully involved and play a key role in the various spheres of social and ecclesiastical life, so that their voices have an increasing weight and their authority is increasingly recognised. During his papacy, Francis had brought more women into senior positions within the Church's central administration, including into the departments responsible for choosing future bishops, as well as the head of the Vatican museums. According to CNN, by 2023, 10 years into his pontificate, the percentage of women in the Vatican workforce had risen from 19.2 to 23.4%. The recent Synod on Synodality was the first time women and lay people were allowed to vote in any Catholic synod of bishops, with 54 female voters included amongst the 360 delegates. Many questions from the meeting, including the topic of women deacons in the Church, remains unanswered, however, and the Church's teaching largely unchanged. In his autobiography, Francis was also limited in his response, stating the issue of women deacons remains open to study. While the idea of women's ordination to the priesthood remains entirely off the table, some are hopeful that other roles will bring a greater visibility to women in the Church. Francis's handling of the sexual abuse crisis within the Church has also had mixed results. It became a central issue right from the start of his papacy. In his autobiography, he revealed that the white box pictured at the meeting of Francis and Benedict XVI in 2013 contained documents relating to the most difficult and painful situations, cases of abuse, corruption, dark dealings, wrongdoings. In 2014, he set up a pontifical commission for the protection of minors within the Vatican to guide him. Many members became disillusioned, however, and one member, an abuse survivor, quit in 2017. In 2023, one of the foremost experts on sexual abuse also quit the commission over transparency and accountability issues. In other areas, he showed stronger resolve, introducing new rules in 2019 that made it mandatory for the first time for all dioceses to set up systems to report abuse and cover-ups. In 2021, he made changes to the canon law of the Church to force bishops to take action against priests who abuse minors and vulnerable adults. Yet his papacy was not without missteps. In 2018, he admitted he had made grave errors in his handling of clerical abuse cases in Chile. During a visit to the country, he had defended Bishop Juan Barros, who stood accused of covering up sexual abuse. The Pope cited a lack of truthful and balanced information about the situation and subsequently invited victims from the country to Rome to apologise. He would repeat the claim in his autobiography, insisting that when he was informed about the abuse, he decided, "No silence or concealment can be tolerated on this question, neither outside the Church, nor least of all inside it. It is something over which there can be no argument." On the morning of Easter Monday, the 21st of April 2025, it was announced that Pope Francis had died at the age of 88. The news shocked many, as he had appeared on the balcony of St. Peter's only the day before. His health had been failing for many years, however, and he was frequently seen in a wheelchair or using a cane. Earlier in 2025, he'd suffered a serious medical episode in which his condition had become critical, although he was later discharged and recovered. His funeral took place on the 26th of April, and the church undertook 9 days of mourning for the pontiff. Many commented that Francis had represented the face of mercy in his approach to the papacy, often seeking to soften harsh stances and statements made by previous popes in regards to church doctrine. He was also often noted for his simplicity and modesty in his attitude towards his role, stating that the Bishop of Rome is a pastor and a disciple, not a powerful man in this world. At his request, his funeral service was simplified, and he refused the traditional triple caskets for his coffin. His spiritual testament, dated the 29th of June 2022, revealed his wishes to be buried at the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, rather than at St. Peter's, as was tradition, making him the first pope to be buried there since the 17th century. As his coffin arrived, it was greeted by 40 mourners, consisting of homeless, prisoners, migrants, prostitutes, and transgender people, all holding white roses. His final resting place remains a striking and powerful witness to his outlook. Under a reproduction of his silver pectoral cross, and illuminated by a single spotlight, the marble tomb bears a single word: Franciscus.